Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presented by Jim, Lever, and Hired. So, my name is Jen Tardy, and I am really excited to be moderating today's discussion on attracting underrepresented talent. So one quick thing is about the work that we're doing at Jennifer Tardy Consulting, where we coach people who are on their job search, and we also help employers to implement effective diversity recruiting programs. And so just within the work that we're doing, I'm particularly invested in today's discussion. And I'm really excited today about the panel speakers that we have. But before I hand the mic over to our speakers, I do want to quickly go over a few housekeeping items, if you don't mind. Now, first, today's webinar is being recorded and it will be available on demand after our live session today. Now, the GYM team has also added some additional resources which are available through the related content section of your webinar console. So be sure to go over and check that out. So we'd love to hear from you today during today's presentation. So if you have a question for any of our speakers, feel free to send it through the Ask Question section of the webinar console. And we'll be answering questions permitting time at the end of today's presentation. Now, lastly, I do encourage you to participate in the attendee chat, which you'll see just below the question tab. Please share your own perspectives, comments, or just give a virtual snaps for our speakers, okay? Now, with that, I'd like to welcome our speakers for today's webinar and allow them to introduce themselves. So let's kick things off with Kim. Kim, would you mind introducing yourself?
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Jones. I'm very excited to be here with my esteemed panel and partners today. I'm a senior member of the HR leadership team at University of California, Irvine. I'm also an instructor in the Office of Continuing Education. And I will say I am a lifelong talent acquisition professional. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Awesome, thank you, Kim. And Dean, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for just the opportunity. And again, I concur with Kim. It's just great to be with wonderful fellow panelists. My name is Dean Del Peach. I am a director of talent and diversity for an organization called Fixed Software. I also own my own consultancy called Stracity. It's a play on words. It means strategic diversity, where we help organizations in terms of creating diversity inclusion frameworks and education and workshops. And I'm also a professor and program lead at local post-secondary here in the Toronto area, and I teach equity, diversity, inclusion in the workplace. And so it's a little bit about me.
Awesome, thank you, Dean. And last but not least, Sam.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Friedman. I am the head of people strategy and therefore our talent acquisition team as well here at Hired. Really excited to chat with you guys today and talk more about this really important topic.
Thank you for introducing yourself. And so I appreciate all of you for introducing yourself. Now let's set the stage for a moment before we go into our panel questions. So today we're talking about the pipeline problem and how to leverage recruiting processes to attract untapped talent and create more diversity within our candidate pools. Now, the pipeline problem refers to moments where we hear people say that there's a lack of qualified underrepresented talent available, which we know is a myth, yet some organizations continue to blame the pipeline problem as the reason that they can't hire more women, people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus groups, veterans, and other underrepresented populations. So in today's panel discussion, we'll talk about how you can leverage your recruiting process to attract underrepresented talent and build balanced teams within your organization. So if you're ready, then let's move right into the questions. So Kim, this first question, I'm going to send it right on over to you. Why is it that some recruiters blame the lack of diversity in their organizations on a pipeline problem? And what would be your advice to them?
take myself off mute first. That would help. So a couple of things. I have some really strong opinions about this discussion about pipelines. So first of all, this really is a myth. There is no shortage of candidates in the pipeline. A couple of things that I often share. First of all, this statement presumes that every candidate who has ever been hired from not an underrepresented group always met or exceeded the qualifications. And we know that that is simply not true. There have been plenty of people who were hired to requisitions who were mediocre, who were unqualified, who were a referral, somebody that they knew, a request from your C-suite to hire someone and make it work or make that person fit. So let's just make sure we're telling the truth about what placements and hiring has been first and foremost. Secondly, there is talent is plentiful. It doesn't always look the way that people subscribe. So we tend to clearly hire people based on experience, but understanding that there are still barriers that exist for underrepresented communities, barriers to education and experience, we have to give people an opportunity to compete based on demonstrated aptitude. That is fair and reasonable. And with that, organizations who have never taken the time to acknowledge that there are still barriers and help people to overcome those barriers, you have no right to complain. You cannot expect that the market simply offers up talent because you need it and you haven't taken the time to also plant and cultivate seeds among people who clearly have the aptitude and have been denied access to opportunity. So it is indeed a myth, and a myth that organizations really need to demonstrate commitment to overcoming to be able to create the diversity that they're looking for in their organizations.
Yeah, I love the idea of overcoming the myth. Sam, anything to add to that, or any thoughts about that question?
I mean, I am super aligned with Kim's statements. I think a couple other things that I would just say is that I often see companies just aren't really diversifying their own strategy or playbook when it comes to these things, but then they're expecting a bit of different results. And so it's really important for recruiters to, be on the hunt for those most up-to-date tools. I think what we see is that there are always different kinds of product releases coming out that are aimed at being more inclusive or casting that wider net. And so recruiters should be looking through those processes frequently. And then, I think just to echo, what Kim said, really, what are you doing at a company level? Are you sponsoring opportunities with underrepresented groups? Are you cultivating mentoring interactions throughout the organization? How are you putting yourself, your leaders, your teams in a position to build meaningful relationships before those individuals even hit a candidate stage, right? Because that's what's the important thing here.
Thank you. Thank you. And what about you, Dean? What are your thoughts on this question about the pipeline problem?
Yeah, I think both Kimberly and Sam just, really nailed it in terms of kind of giving us, an overview. I could only really add this, that really it comes down to intentionality. Charles Schwarf, from Wells Fargo, last year he made this statement that that the reason why they haven't hired a lot of Black leaders because there's a limited talent pool. And the truth is no, it's not that there's a limited talent pool. There's a limited talent pool in your network. There's a limited talent pool in your referral base, not that there's a limited talent pool. So I think when it all boils down to it, it starts with intentionality, and intentionality, it comes from an organization saying that we are not just going to try to solve the diversity recruitment problem, but we're going to try to solve the overall integration of diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity into our DNA as a company. And when you can start to do that, where it cascades throughout the whole entire organization and really build a framework around it, not just your recruiters will become intentional, your hiring managers will become intentional, your leaders will say, we must have talent from different groups in our organization, or we won't perform to our best. And so I think it really kind of really comes down to intentionality at the end of the day.
Thank you. And Sam, let's talk a little bit about employer branding. Now, specifically, what are some ways that you can build an employer brand that is both attractive and trusted by underrepresented candidates? as a place where they'll feel safe to work while also avoiding tokenism and performative activism. What are your thoughts there?
I think, it's so important as everyone is thinking through what they're going to do as a company in terms of making these efforts to make sure that employers really don't tread into performative DEI. I think we've seen a lot of companies come out with diversity statements or put up those black boxes on social media. And as a people leader, as a candidate, I want to know what they're doing beyond those things, because quite frankly, that's not even table stakes. That's not even bringing yourself. You need to be doing quite a bit more, and you need to be publicizing those things. So, as a leader of a tool that does, help with diversity recruiting, we are always constantly striving to provide that inclusive and equitable workforce and culture. And I think the things that, I've personally looked at and asked our team to look at are, what are those structural changes in our processes and our systems that are going to remove barriers for underrepresented groups and talents to succeed at our company or to succeed in our recruitment processes. And as Dean was talking about, it really is a cultural commitment. So, how are you going beyond those DEI statements? What's your commitment to inclusion? What's your commitment to belonging? How are you threading those things throughout every being of your organization? And one thing that I think is definitely a myth here is, like, a lot of leaders will talk about DEI as an HR initiative or a talent acquisition initiative. And that's a huge part of the problem right there. It is on every single person in the company, every hiring manager, every IC, every person that comes in should understand what being an inclusive and thoughtful leader and person in your company is. You need to make sure that you're activating allies within your company to push these really important initiatives. And then you also need to make sure, like, how are you living it, threading it through that organization, living it day to day, right? It's making sure that it really is a lived value.
Thank you. And Dean, what's your take on this as well, too? Building an employer brand that's both attractive and it's trusted by untapped talent.
Yeah, Jen, Samantha gave us so many golden nuggets in there. And one thing that Samantha said that I just really kind of resonates with me is the external statement, right? So George Floyd dies, or there's racism against Asian groups, or maybe something happens, towards the LGBTQ community. And what do our companies do? Leaders put out that external statement. Oh, we support, we're in solidarity. And so then a lot of people get this thought of, okay, well, their employer brand must be effective because they're standing in solidarity. And that's what we think. But you know what ended up happening? Like, after companies started putting these external statements, some of them, the organizations, their employees started to say, no, that's not our experience in our workplace. And so because that wasn't their experience, then the voice becomes inauthentic. And then our employer brand, what happens? It gets marred, right? Because now we're hearing two different voices. So I believe in what I call the belonging principle. And what that is there was a study that was done by organizations where they did like an employee net promoter score. And what they discovered is that with employees that feel a sense of belonging, they're willing to actually promote their companies 167% more than other organizations. So what does that tell us? It tells us that if you create an inclusive and equitable environment where employees feel safe and supported and can be their whole self, do their best work, they will promote your organization. That's your best recruitment employer branding strategy that you have. Get your employees to the place where they feel a sense of belonging, that intrinsic value, where the voice doesn't come from an external statement. It comes directly from them to their network. And I think that is one of the key things that we can do. So, Samantha really just kind of, geared that up for me just to kind of really express. I think that's one of the things that we could really do to really support that employer brand.
And what's interesting is, to that point too, Dean, I've also seen some data around how when job seekers are looking for jobs, they are more trusting of the feedback from employees than they are of anything that an employer puts on their website, than anything else. And so to that point, when your employees are talking, candidates are listening. So good point.
That's a great point, Jim. Great point.
Kim, let's talk a little bit about signaling inclusion, right? So what does an inclusive careers page in outreach look like? And how do you signal psychological safety and commitment to underrepresented talent in your messaging?
Yeah, so a couple things. The messages, first of all, have to be delivered by everyone. I know there's a question we talked about tokenism. And so I am good for scrolling through the entirety of a company's online profile. I shouldn't only see women in your branding during Women's History Month. I shouldn't only see your Black employees during Black History Month. You should have a consistent message about the importance and the integration of diversity, equity, inclusion all the time. And so one of the things I also share with people, you can't treat diversity, equity, inclusion as an accessory. It has to really be an essential. And so when you think about, for those of you who bake, diversity isn't icing on the cake, it's eggs in the cake. So if you've ever baked a cake and not put eggs in it, and then your cake comes out flat, that's what happens to your organization when diversity, equity, inclusion aren't really integrated. Girl, yes, with the snaps, when it's not included. So I might add a bongo drum with my snaps too. So it has to be fully integrated. Everybody has to always be talking about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this concept of psychological safety, we talk about it a lot around underrepresented groups. But when you are really touching on nerves in an organization, you should probably also have some, young white male employees who raise their hand and say, thank you, because I don't fit the cookie cutter. And this message about being authentic and embracing everyone has also helped me just not be skipped over in opportunities. The last thing I will say, and this is around everyone telling the story, I was part of an organization before that put together recruiting teams. And we were getting ready for NSBE. And we got into the conference room. There were 14 of us, all Black employees and one white employee. And she said, we can't do this, because if we go to NSBE like this, the NSBE attendees will think that this is what the ratios look like. And that's not who we are. I appreciated that she volunteered, but we need everybody to volunteer for every recruiting team, and that the recruiting teams don't just look like the demographic that we are attempting to reach.
And Kim, can you just indulge me for a second and say it again for the people in the back of the room about the icing on the cake versus the eggs?
Yes, diversity, equity, inclusion. It is an essential. Like, it has to be embedded. And one of the ways I try to help organizations really connect, your diversity, equity, inclusion strategy should both elevate and amplify your organizational strategy. That's how you make sure it's not seen as an accessory and it's seen as an essential. So for sure, do not bake a cake without eggs. And I dare you to try it and see what you get.
So I appreciate that. And Sam, I'd be interested in your thoughts too on signaling psychological safety and commitment to underrepresented talent.
Absolutely. So I think, one of these things is that, especially as different companies are thinking through this, like, people want quick wins here. And like, this is something that just doesn't happen overnight. It really is not like this turnkey solution that all of a sudden everything's different. It takes time. It really does. And you need to build that trust within the organization. You need to then have that trust echo outside of your walls to your candidates to create that safe space. For me and in my own lived experience, transparency is what breeds that trust as well. And so, being open about where your organization might currently fall short in those goals or in those initiatives or in those efforts is important, and not something to be hidden or, necessarily thinking like, oh, I need to be ashamed of this and we can't communicate out to our teams until we've done better. I think it's really good to say, here's where we are today, and here's where we need to be, and here's the plan how we're going to get there, and then making sure that there is that transparency of those strides and improvements you're hoping for, but also making sure you're welcoming all voices to contribute to those initiatives as well, and providing those avenues to do so in the way employees want to do it. And for different groups, that might mean different things. And so like things that I think about as a people leader are, maybe it's an all hands, maybe it's an engagement survey, maybe it's an anonymized feedback loop to management, but I make sure that all employees really know that there are these different avenues and they're all taken incredibly seriously.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And even to your point, I often talk with leaders about how increasing diversity, we tend to ineffectively look at it in a binary way. Like, are you there yet? Are you there yet? Versus more directional. We didn't get here to underrepresentation overnight, and we're not going to correct it overnight either. So we have to begin thinking about it from a directional standpoint. Are we moving the needle in the right direction? What milestones are we crossing right now that's getting us closer to where we need to be? Thank you for pointing that out too, Sam. So Dean, can you join me in shifting the conversation to talking about sourcing, okay? So sourcing is one of the most effective channels for hiring underrepresented talent. What are some of the sourcing ideas and channels that recruiting teams can use to open up their search when they're looking for untapped talent?
Yeah, one of the ones I really, really like, sources that I really like, and I think it's really shown to be effective within the organizations that I've worked for, is really building what I call community partnerships. And these are partnerships with organizations that will drive talent from different dimensions of diversity. So one that comes to mind that I know is a global organization, but really primarily based, in North America, is the Black Professionals Technology Network. And what they do is they're really a network of Black professionals who work in the technology space in particular. And the organization will actually help you recruit Black folks. They'll help you to drive your job postings out to Black talent and Black networks. So, for example, if you really want to ensure that you're increasing, specific pipelines, figure out who maybe your national or even local community organizations are that can help you to drive that talent. There was another one that I've worked with in the past. I think it's more Canadian based though. It's called Ableosity. And what they do is they actually work with a hub of organizations that deal with the dimension of disability and neurodiversity. And what they'll do is work with these organizations. And we have to understand that a lot of times when we're recruiting individuals from different dimensions of diversity, particularly disability and neurodiversity, their actual interview processes have to be a little bit different and tweaked versus others in certain situations. And so these organizations walk alongside with you to really help support your interview processes so that you really get the maximum value out of them. And, I've seen, tremendous results through some of these organizations. And so I really encourage everyone to really think about it. And also I'll kind of maybe throw this in, I encourage you to have an applicant tracking system that you can leverage where you can give these organizations their own internal job boards, because these organizations that we work with, they've got their own internal job boards to our jobs and a direct link to send. And we know, okay, this has come from Ableosity. Fantastic. We're going to prioritize that. We're going to make sure that we're intentional to ensure that, the candidates that are coming through are getting, interviews. And so, one source that I want to kind of mention that is definitely using community partnerships.
Thank you. And
everyone wants me to repeat that organization. Yes. Let me repeat the organization. So the organization was Black Professionals in Technology, and the other one was Ableosity.
You're saying Ableosity?
Yeah, ABI, Able. ABILOCITY. Ableosity.
Got it. No pressure.
Yeah, no worries. I had to think it through.
So Sam, tell me a little bit about some of the sourcing channels with Hired.
Absolutely. So, to use a tech term on this call, we absolutely eat our own dog food here at Hired. And so what we do is we use our platform, right? And so we utilize our bias reduction features on the platform. And we also leverage our newest DEI tool, which is Diversity Goals, which was recently launched. And, I think what it does is it really offers a simplified process for sourcing and engaging different underrepresented tech candidates. And what we've seen, which is incredible, this is a newer feature on our platform, but what we've seen is that companies and hiring managers and recruiters who use this, almost 50% of their interview requests have now gone to underrepresented candidates, where it was closer to 20% without the tool. And so I think it's definitely been something great that we've seen in our own processes, but amazing for other recruiters to go out and be using these things as well.
Thank you, Sam. And Kim, can we talk a little bit about screening and interviewing? Let's move the conversation into that theme. So let's say you've done the work to find and attract underrepresented talent. How do recruiters ensure bias is minimized and disrupted so that job seekers, they have a positive candidate experience and they can make it through the final stages of the hiring funnel?
Yeah, so a bias-free interview process is not the sole responsibility of the recruiter. And let me explain why. Far too often, recruiters and managers are pitted against each other, and managers are often referred to as customers. And recruiters aren't always positioned in their organization to speak up when a manager or a hiring team isn't following a process that just ensures that we're being fair and we really are seeking the best talent. So I really believe that this has to be driven from the leadership team. Much the same way if you had a manager who was using his budget for money laundering, the CFO would not go beg, like, can you please stop using company funds this way? Nobody would care about a customer relationship at that point. A person will be given a direction. So I think first and foremost is making sure that the message about a fair and equitable hiring process that really leads to the best possible talent being selected has to be enforced at the leadership level. Secondarily, then recruiters have to really be positioned as facilitators and be empowered to address situations without fear of, kind of negative retribution from the manager. And so as they're helping to establish questions that come directly from the job posting that align with assessing culture compatibility. And I'm careful about those words. I never use the term fit. I don't know if this person will fit in. We're not talking about fitting your foot in a shoe. We're talking about organizational compatibility. So you have to make sure you're asking questions, but at the same time, you have to make sure you've been forward facing with sharing with job seekers what your culture is before you start asking questions that help you determine whether or not this person might be the right person. The other thing too is what we call challenging assumptions. When you hear in the debrief, interviewers who make statements like, I don't think they'll be happy here. It's often rooted in bias, rarely ever rooted in actual fact. And recruiters have to be really seen and allowed to act as facilitators that when assessments of candidates are being offered up that aren't rooted in fact, they have to be able to challenge those assumptions and make sure we really are evaluating and making recommendations based on fact and not emotion or assumption.
I like that. One of the questions that I encourage recruiters to ask, especially when they get feedback, is, well, how does that feedback connect to their ability to do the job? Can the person do the job? And sometimes when we make these statements, that's how you begin to uncover the bias. When you're like, oh, there is no real connection to that. Okay. So we need to remove that. I like that.
And if I could just add one more thing, I think what I would say I've experienced as I've been working to help organizations be better. Organizations tend to hire people that will make us comfortable, but not make us more competitive. And you have to really be able to distinguish between those two when you are making an assessment. Hire the person that is going to create the right amount of kind of constructive chaos to challenge to challenge the status quo, to break through groupthink. There has to be some real thought behind, will this person help us be better and more competitive, because they are very different than what we have in our department or what we typically hire.
Thank you. And that's a really, really good point. And Sam, I think when we talked before, you may have had some thoughts to add to this one as well too, right?
Absolutely. I think Kim has hit so many of those important points. It really does go down to me. And when I think about our TA teams, is empowering those facilitators of the interview process to really have those open and direct conversations where they can challenge hiring managers or hiring teams in a way in which they are ensuring, right, that competitive advantage. I think reminding teams that diversifying backgrounds, education, experience, knowledge, that is a differentiator for your business. And so that's really important. And I think the other thing is you want to make sure that you are, again, when it goes back to like those structures or those frameworks, have you done interview training with everyone who is interviewing? Do they know that we are all using the same criteria to assess candidates, and that we're not just going off of, different different questions for different people, or, oh, we're going to do a roundtable for this interview debrief, but we're only going to do one-on-ones with the recruiter for this, that there is a really followed, structured process. And that you also are, I know it's hard in this market. This is the craziest recruiting market I've seen in the last 15 years, but truly get through your slates. Get through your slates. I know it's hard, and it's hard to push your teams right now, but make sure that you are seeing your first rounds or your second rounds through, so that you are giving chances to as many people in your pipeline as possible.
Yeah, one of the things that we have been seeing too. So, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, no. You finish your statement. I just want to know if I could add after you're done.
Absolutely. One of the things that we have been seeing a lot of too, to your point, Sam, was that when we were going in to audit data from a hiring process standpoint, that a lot of candidates were going unreviewed. And when we started thinking about, the comprehensive diversity within a candidate pool, it's in the people who are being overlooked. We saw more diversity among those, and less diversity among those who are moving forward. So if you keep a position open for 2 weeks, for example, and if you know that you're going to wind up interviewing people after a week, then only keep your posting open for a week, right? And if you need to go back and open it later, then open it later, but review all of your candidates. Go ahead, Dean.
To be honest, you are literally touching on where I wanted to touch on, and I think I could just simply just give you a business case of something. I believe in data. I believe in data as one of the biggest proponents to help us really break down bias. I'm going to give you an actual real case. So, looking for software developers, hiring for software teams. In the process, the first step was that everybody went through a testing process, and it was just a technical test. But because our applicant tracking system that we use, and I'm sorry, I got to do this. We use Lever, so this is not a shout out. It is a shout out, but I just love Lever. We actually collect applicant tracking data coming into our pipeline. So what we were able to do is actually figure out how many females and how many males were actually taking this test. That's what we did. We did a gender-based study specifically, and non-binary folk. So what we noticed was that the same equal amount that had completed the test actually went to the first stage, 50% from both groups. And then the second stage, 50%. But at the final stage, here's what we found out. That 50% of those going to that final stage were actually being hired in the end who were male, but only 12.5% were being hired who were female. And so what we actually did is we broke down from there who was in the final stage interviews with everybody. And I kid you not, what we discovered was in all the times where we hired a female, there was an additional female in the room in those hiring stages. Whereas where the females weren't being hired, there was not a female. So I took this data and I went with my our recruiters to the director of engineering and to their teams. And I said, I'm going to show you what's actually happening. What we were able to do is empower our recruiters not to be recruiters, but talent advisors. And that's what I think we do with data. We empower them. And what we literally did was we changed all of our hiring processes to ensure that every single hiring process had diverse representation in the final stage. And through that, we were able, I'm telling you, I kid you not, we were actually able to track a significant increase in hiring from a gender perspective of females into our teams. And so I encourage everyone to really make sure you have an applicant tracking system that can give you this type of data. That's really important, because at the end of the day, you can use that to empower your recruiters to become talent advisors. I think it's really key.
Did your ATS also keep track of who was interviewing too? Is that how you were able to like sift through the data on gender dynamics conducting the interviews?
Yeah, so we were able to keep track of basically everyone, because we had that information coming in from the ATS. So we were literally able to kind of track, okay, we know the pools of people from different groups going through.
Awesome. Thank you. And while we're talking, Dean, maybe you can lead us into the next topic, and then I'll come over to you, Kim. So let's talk about offers, right? So at the offer stage, how can you ensure the hiring team is assessing all candidates fairly and not allowing bias to creep in now that they're at the final stage of hiring a new teammate, in addition to, making sure that your hiring team is a diverse hiring team?
Yeah, so, just kind of reflecting on experience, what we try to do is in our final stage, we want to ensure that we believe in what we call the two in the pool methodology, right? So we want to make sure in the final stage, there's at least two individuals who come from different dimensions of diversity versus that from the dominant group. And so kind of with that said, we're kind of putting our hiring managers in a position alongside with the training that they've received to ensure that we are hiring the most skilled and qualified person from that group. And so that's kind of what we've really done with our hiring teams to set the stage. Now, have we had issues where we're not seeing that final group of applicants? Yes, we've seen that. And so when we see that and we see that that's happening, we have to go back and tweak our processes. And I think it's a work in progress all the time, if I could say that, but you have to make sure that again, we talked about in the beginning, if this intentionality is not there from the beginning, we're just going to be hiring, people. And then at the end of the day, we start to kind of audit and we realize, we weren't intentional about it. And so, that's my encouragement. We use the two in the pool methodology.
Awesome. And Kim, what are your thoughts at the offer stage?
At the offer stage. So a couple of them, I'll say selecting who, I'm assuming you mean how do we select who to extend an offer to? It starts with the job posting for me. And so making sure that we went out to market with a really solid job posting that talked about, what this person will be expected to do, what resources they'll have access to, tools they'll be expected to utilize, who they'll be collaborating with. The second layer of that is making sure that you've actually created a set of interview questions that really assess that and give an opportunity to really articulate who they are compared to that job posting. One of the most important set of instructions I give to all of my hiring teams is we are comparing the candidate to the job posting and not comparing candidates to each other. So whoever's first and whoever's last, like nobody has set the bar for or against the other candidates. You are simply being assessed based on the job profile. So then in that debrief, even up to the senior level positions, our executive searches that I'm managing, before we give yes or no, like a thumbs up or thumbs down, each interviewer has to go in and provide an assessment of that candidate. We do that as a round table. after we now have documented what that candidate profile, how that candidate performed in the interview, now we can start moving to who we believe is yes or no or down selecting. But it has to be based on the information that those that the hiring team really introduced into the original debrief, because all too often you'll get to the end, you say, who do you want to go with? Well, Sam or Tracy, but there's not a why. You have to establish the why first, and that why has to be validated through those discussions. So I think planting those seeds throughout the process, but when you get to that debrief, making sure that you fully profile the candidate before we down select or confirm who the top candidate is an effective way to make sure their process is fair.
Awesome. Thank you. And while we're talking, Kim, maybe you can join me in the next conversation too, as we're talking about measuring results, where we're talking about what metrics do you track or recommend companies track to make sure they're moving the needle to increase representation. And I'll jump in really quickly on this one too, while you're processing. But when I talk to employers all the time, we talk about the importance of measuring retention as well too. And oftentimes, because we're in recruiting, we're thinking that retention isn't a part of, or shouldn't be a part of, our conversation in our swim lane. But I say very loudly that there's no way to truly increase representation if people are leaving your company as quickly as they're coming into your organization, right? And so if we're not, if we in recruiting don't start pulling up a seat at the table to retention conversations, and sometimes even starting the conversation around what does retention look like within the organization, then we're never really going to be able to affect change. So Kim, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, so there has to be there has to be continuity in this. So there are metrics in your recruiting life cycle, but there's also metrics in your employee life cycle. And so I tell people, programs aren't results, results are results. So you can't just measure the number of outreach events that you had and not also then say, what are the outcomes of those outreach events? So number of relationships with diverse organizations, what are the outcomes of those relationships? Total candidate pool representation, again, the outreach event and the results from that. Number of candidates who have applied, candidates who have been interviewed, offered, accept, decline. Once that candidate becomes an employee, if you're hosting an annual or biannual engagement, are you breaking down those engagement results to really understand how people who are typically viewed as underrepresented feel? We talk about discretionary effort at UCI. And so we ask people, kind of raise your hand. Now raise it a little bit higher. That little bit higher is discretionary effort. What does that look like among your underrepresented employees? And it's typically aligned with whether or not people feel valued and safe and engaged. The other piece of that is promotion and mobility. Promotion, clearly we have this sense of always going up, but that mobility sometimes is lateral. Have I moved sideways? That then gave me an opportunity to use a skill set that I had towards a different effort. So I think there's an entire data set, but that data set can be broken into the recruiting life cycle and then the employee life cycle as well.
Awesome. So let's talk about some key takeaways. So we still have some time because I definitely hear that the Q&A is ready for the panel. I hope that the panel is ready for the Q&As too. But before we move into the audience Q&A, let's wrap up the discussion with some key takeaways and final thoughts. Sam, can you kick us off with your final thought?
Absolutely. So, so many gems that my fellow panelists have definitely dropped today. And I feel like, oh my gosh, I could echo so much of them. But I think for me, sitting in the seat I do from a people strategy lens, I really encourage companies to think through what structural changes do you need to be making to your processes and systems so that you are removing barriers for these underrepresented, and really making sure you're taking that harsh eye on what needs to be evaluated and revamped to allow for a more equitable workplace. How are those commitments reflected and interwoven through your culture, right? How are you modeling inclusive leadership leadership. And then, I think activating allies throughout your organization is really what is going to accelerate the momentum of these commitments. And so that's what I would leave the group with, thinking through those three: the structure, your culture, and then your allies. How do you get those things to work together?
Thank you. Let's go to Dean next, and then Kim, I'll send it over to you afterward.
Yeah, well, really enjoyed this panel. I think it's been great. I think the one thing I'll say is this. I kind of recognize that when we do these panels, there's people from all walks of life on these panels. So you might have people in the beginning stages, more intermediate, and more advanced. And so with that said, I want to really say as a final takeaway, like, this whole conversation that we're having around diversity, inclusion, etc., is it's a journey. It's a journey. It's work. It takes time. It's not a one-day fix. It's not something you're gonna turn around and you do tomorrow. And so if you're in the beginning stages, I just want to, number one, encourage you to start the journey. And even if you're going to start with something, start with something. Start to have the conversations with your senior leadership. Start to get it in their ear, and really just start making small tweaks. And to the person who's who's really kind of more intermediate to advanced, ensure that this is a part of your business strategy. And that's really, really key. Just like how growing revenue is a part of your strategy, your strategy to grow your business, make sure this is integrated into your business strategy. It's phased out into, yearly plans over the next 3 to 5 years, even 10, depending on your organization. And that you're really, really working towards making sure that every aspect of your organization really is influenced by inclusive and equitable outcomes. And so I'll pause there with that.
Awesome. Thank you, Dean. And Kim.
Yeah, so a couple of things, and especially because I've been reading the questions in our Q&A window. Genuine commitment is absolutely necessary. There also has to be commitment to transparency. With that, a great deal of accountability. And a lot of times we hear accountability, and it's always viewed as if something went wrong, who gets held accountable. But accountability is also about who's been empowered, and when things go right, who to celebrate. That has to be also a focus of accountability. And then, what Dean mentioned, the same way we focus on safety and quality, we have to also be focused on results in any of our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So those results-focused initiatives have to be fully integrated into your organizational strategy.
Thank you for sharing that great closing thoughts. Now, let's take a moment to dive into the Q&A. So let me start with the first question. Let's see. Ghosting by organizations during the hiring process has become a big issue. I wonder what the panelists' thoughts are on that. This ghosting is harmful to all candidates, but especially to women and people of color going through the interview process. Who would like to pick up that question? Who has some thoughts on that? What are your thoughts, Sam?
I'm blown away at the thought of ghosting, just thinking through our own processes. I mean, I think candidates are, even if you, I think let's put it this way. I think there's a difference between this thought process a lot of recruiters have of keeping people warm for maybe an extended period of time, and maybe they're not doing a great job of keeping those individuals warm, and then straight up just ghosting individuals. I mean, I'm of the belief that every candidate you bring into your process, you are absolutely owed some kind of feedback in terms of, potentially why you are maybe not moving on to a next round. But, I think that, of course, it's going to disproportionately affect women and people of color because they, or these underrepresented groups. But you really need to make sure that you are creating processes in place. So you're putting structures in place in which this can't happen in your organization. And if you are participating or seeing it happen in your organization, you need to be effectively bringing it up in different chats and forums and ways in which your management, your organization can move forward with it. yeah, I'm really like, I can't even imagine not giving that feedback to employees or to candidates or closing that loop. But making sure that if you are seeing it or you are experiencing it, that you're elevating it to different levels as well.
As I'm working with people who are on their job search as well too, one of the questions that I get quite often is, "What if I don't hear back from my recruiter? I haven't heard back from my recruiter. I haven't heard back." So the ghosting thing, it definitely is real, and I've actually had to have conversations with job seekers to not allow their experience with a recruiter to sour their taste for what could be a great company as well too, even though the recruiter represents the overall organization. So you're right. It's every time I hear about this whole ghosting thing, it's a lot. It's a lot. Okay, let me scoot on over to the next question. So let's see. Dean, let me ask this question for you. What are your thoughts on creating diverse panels successfully? How can you strive to always have diverse interview panels while not overburdening underrepresented groups that are at your organization?
Yeah, I think it starts first with, communication. And what I mean by that is this. If as an organization, we start off by really, really indicating that, equitable recruitment processes are extremely important to us. And, the possibility exists that we may need to encourage people from different backgrounds to be a part of our interview panels. And we just want to, encourage you that if you are called to be a part of the panel, please try to make the effort. I think if, the voice is authentic and it starts with that, then, people will most likely be encouraged. Now, don't get me wrong. I do understand that we can overburden individuals. And so, that's why I'm really for just trying to ensure you reach out to a broad population, and it could be even cross-functional. So here's what I mean. If you're hiring for a particular team, as opposed to just going to the same people in that particular team, look at other cross-functional groups that may have different individuals from different, dimensions of diversity, and bring them in, especially when you're assessing, cultural contribution, right, to the organization. So maybe the people who are on that team, on the specific team, might be addressing more technical skills, but someone from a cross-functional team might be looking at how that person will add to the overall organization. I do love Kimberly's point, because I use it all the time. I don't believe in fit. I believe in, contribution. I believe in additions to culture and to organizations. And so, just think outside of the team and look at other team members.
And something else that I talk to employers about as well too, to add to that point, is consider creating an ambassador program where people within the organization raise their hand and say, "I want to be an ambassador," and then so they already understand that the commitment is X, Y, and Z. One of them being to be on the interview teams as well too. So that's something to also consider. Okay, let's see. Oh, this is a good question. How are you promoting a sense of belonging and engagement in more remote environments since COVID? Kim, do you want to take that question?
Sure. So it's interesting as everybody is talking, you hear the Zoom fatigue. How do you create inclusion and belonging if everybody now is just their voice and not also their actual image? And so we've done a couple things. I'll tell you the two teams that I manage. We take the first kind of 5 to 7 minutes of every meeting, and we rotate across the team for a new person to simply host the icebreaker. And we put 0 limits on it. Sometimes it's been someone who shared an article. We had someone this week introduce 7 dad jokes just to add some levity to our meetings. We've had a few team members who benchmarked with some peers on a topic that was really important that we just hadn't been able to get to. And they took the initiative to go out and get some information. And so what we wanted to do is make sure everybody has a voice. And being on screen wasn't just about, am I taking attendance? Are you here? Am I really giving you an opportunity to contribute? And when I tell you we put zero limits on what the icebreaker is, there are zero limits. I was quite surprised by the dad jokes, but entertained like you would not believe. And so allowing people to be comfortable with what they're comfortable with and letting that just be a contribution to the team.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And this next question, and this will likely be, well, we may have one or two other questions left, but Dean, I'm going to send this one over to you. What is a good practice for diversity reach out via LinkedIn? 50% of reach out on a weekly basis? And that's the question.
I don't know if I understand that question. Can that be clarified a little bit more? What do you mean by diversity reach out? Do you mean like opening up your LinkedIn recruiter and reaching out to candidates from different backgrounds? Like, is that what's meant? I just want to clarify.
So maybe we'll have a second to come back to that question, just in case the person who asked that one wants to clarify in the Q&A. But we'll skip and we'll go to the next question. So let's see. Oh, a great question. And I think that this would be cool to hear from all three of you on this. How do you lead a conversation about diversity with leaders who are uncomfortable with the discussion? So let's kick it off with you, Dean.
Yeah, I would start first by assessing why they're uncomfortable with the conversation. I think it's just a real conversation that we have to have in our organizations. But I think here's what I've learned. I've learned a lot of times the reason why people are uncomfortable with this conversation is because they don't even understand what the word diversity even means. And I'm going to be honest with you, they don't. So the actual word diversity, it actually means the unique characteristics that represent us as individuals, because we're not mono, we're not singular. And so all of us, like even the white straight male, if you think about this logically, has dimensions of diversity. If you look at me, I identify as Black, but from a heritage perspective, I was born in Toronto. My parents are from the Caribbean, but my dad's background is actually Portuguese, and you would never know it looking at me. So the truth of the matter is that we all have different dimensions of diversity. And I think if we can understand that all of us, this conversation represents all of us, but what we're really talking about is equity, right? And really getting to the place where people understand that there are some people in this conversation that have greater advantages versus others, and we need to figure out how we can have more fairness and balance. I think people will come to a place where, oh, so I have diversity, but I have more advantage than others. What can I do to solve the problem? And I think that's kind of really where I'm going with it. And so again, depending on why they're uncomfortable, but again, from my experience, let's see how we can work together to solve that equity issue. And that's kind of where I start.
Thank you.
That's like a carbon copy. No, I think that is an excellent response. And I would say exactly the same thing. I think getting to a place where people also are able to recognize their own privilege and their where they are and how to help boost other individuals to create an equitable workforce is the most important way to enter that conversation.
Perfect. And then in 60 seconds to close us out, Kim, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I learned early to disarm people who were either completely resistant or didn't understand because they heard diversity and automatically thought, ethnicity and gender. And so I'll start my session, just ask how many people in the room are left-handed, because being left-handed is not controversial. But if you're left-handed, the world was not created for you. Scissors, one version of the iPhone was practically inoperable for people who were left-handed. And so I've learned to start those discussions with a topic that neutralizes the topic, kind of lets people put their, let their defenses down, and then really talk about diversity, not as differences as much as it is just everybody having unique characteristics.
Perfect. Now, Kim, Sam, Dean, this has been an amazing conversation today about the pipeline problem and how it's a myth. Thank you all for all of your time. Thank you all in the audience for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care.